Have you ever noticed how silence can say more than words ever could? A pause that lingers after an argument. A quiet room where two people sit, not speaking, yet everything is being said. Or the peaceful kind of silence, the kind that feels like truth, not emptiness. We often think communication is about what we say. But psychology teaches us that it's also about what we don't say. Silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of meaning. Let's explore the psychology of silence and why sometimes saying nothing speaks the loudest. Silence is one of the oldest languages in human history. Before we learned to speak, we communicated through gestures, eye contact, and stillness. Even now, silence remains the most honest form of expression. Psychologists say that silence often carries emotional data, the things we feel but can't put into words. When someone withdraws, pauses, or hesitates before responding, that silence means something. It could be discomfort. It could be reflection. Or it could be restraint, the choice to not say what would cause harm. In therapy, silence is powerful. Therapists sometimes pause on purpose, not to fill the room, but to give the patient space to listen to themselves. Because when the talking stops, the truth begins to surface. Silence gives emotions room to breathe. It reveals what's real beneath the noise. Emotional silence happens when we stop speaking, not because we have nothing to say, but because we have too much to say. You've probably felt it before. That ache of wanting to express yourself, but not knowing how. The lump in your throat that keeps words trapped inside. This kind of silence isn't weakness. It's emotional overflow. It's the moment your heart whispers, "I'm tired." In relationships, emotional silence can mean many things. Sometimes it's a wall, a defense mechanism built to protect the heart. Sometimes it's a bridge, a pause that helps us reflect before reacting. But here's the danger. When emotional silence becomes a habit, it can quietly destroy connection. Couples who stop communicating don't always break up through fights. They fade through silence. Through the long, wordless dinners. Through the texts that never come. Through the things that go unsaid, until the relationship itself goes silent. Psychologists call this emotional withdrawal, when silence becomes a shield to avoid vulnerability. But the paradox is that silence can also be a form of healing. Sometimes, choosing silence is choosing peace. Not every truth needs to be spoken. Not every battle deserves a reply. Because there's power in restraint, the kind that says, "I'm protecting my peace, not proving my point." We live in a world addicted to noise. People talk constantly, post constantly, argue constantly, as if silence means invisibility. But social silence is not weakness. It's power. In social psychology, silence can be a dominant form of communication. In leadership, those who speak less often command more attention. Their silence makes people lean in, wondering what they'll say next. Think of the teacher who pauses before speaking. Suddenly, the whole room listens. Or the friend who doesn't interrupt but lets you talk, and somehow, you feel heard in a way words can't provide. Silence commands space because it carries mystery. It says, "I'm not reacting, I'm observing." And that makes people uneasy, because silence forces others to confront themselves. That's why, in arguments, the quiet person often holds the most power. They're not driven by impulse. They're driven by control. But silence can also be social rebellion. When the world shouts at you to speak, to justify, to defend, silence becomes an act of resistance. It says, "I don't owe you my energy." So sometimes, the most powerful response is no response at all. Not because you don't care, but because you've outgrown the need to prove that you do. Then there's a different kind of silence, the kind that exists within us. Inner silence is what happens when the world goes quiet and you finally hear your own mind. It's uncomfortable at first, because when we slow down, our thoughts get louder. All the emotions we've been avoiding, regret, anger, fear, begin to rise. That's why so many people fear silence. Because silence makes you face yourself. But if you sit with it long enough, silence transforms. It becomes clarity. It becomes awareness. It becomes truth. In mindfulness and meditation, this is the goal, not to silence your thoughts, but to find stillness beneath them. Neuroscientists have found that moments of silence help the brain regenerate neurons, reduce stress hormones, and boost memory and creativity. In other words, silence heals. It reconnects you to your intuition, the quiet inner voice that knows what you truly need. When you learn to be comfortable in silence, you stop chasing noise for validation. You stop fearing loneliness because solitude becomes your sanctuary. Silence is not always peaceful. Sometimes it's punishment. Sometimes it's avoidance. Sometimes it's control. The silent treatment, for example, is emotional manipulation. It's meant to punish or dominate, to say, "You don't deserve my words." That kind of silence wounds deeply because it withholds connection as a weapon. So not all silence is golden. Some silence demands to be broken. Some silence hides truth that needs to be spoken. The key is awareness. Ask yourself, am I being silent to protect my peace or to avoid my truth? When silence comes from fear, it traps you. When silence comes from strength, it frees you. True emotional intelligence is not about talking more. It's about knowing when to be silent. When you master silence, you master energy. You conserve your words for meaning. You let your presence do the talking. So the next time you feel the urge to fill the space, pause. Listen to what's not being said. Because silence always speaks. The question is, are you listening? Sometimes silence says, "I'm thinking." Sometimes it says, "I'm healing." And sometimes it says, "This conversation no longer deserves my voice." In a world that rewards loudness, being silent can feel like disappearing. But true peace lives in the quiet. Silence is not empty, it's full of answers. It's the language of calm minds and strong souls. It's the space where healing happens, where truth whispers, and where wisdom grows. So the next time you find yourself in silence, don't rush to fill it. Sit with it. Listen to it. Learn from it. Because sometimes, the most profound conversations happen in the spaces between words. And in those moments, silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of understanding. If this message spoke to you, hit the subscribe button and join us here on Mind and Meaning, where we explore the psychology of emotions, healing, and self-awareness every week. Tell me in the comments, what kind of silence do you find most powerful? The silence between people or the silence within? Because maybe it's in the quiet that we finally hear who we truly are.